Forbes India, in association with BNP Paribas, held the third edition of the Forbes India Conversations, the Thought Leadership Forum. The dialogues had thought leaders and policy makers converge to discuss India's sustainability agenda. While the first conversation focused on how India is gearing up towards sustainability, the second discussion for the evening was on how India is ensuring the future of its sustainable development goals.
Gentlemen, before I begin, I just want to set the context. You know, the Sustainability Development Goals for 2030 is something that we have been hearing about a lot, and by all parameters, it seems that India is making great progress. But having said that, you know, we are sitting in a city like New Delhi, which, while great for its greenery and open spaces, is also characterized in the news for all the wrong reasons in the winter because of the levels of air pollution that it sees. So there seems to be a dichotomy, there seems to be a conflict. And that is what we want to discuss here today, that, you know, what can we do so that this conflict gets eradicated to the best extent possible. Let me start with you, June. I spoke about the Sustainability Development Goals, you know, and take infant mortality rate, for example. It has declined from 57% in 2005-06 to about 40% in 2015-16. If you look at the percentage figure, very impressive. But we are still talking about 41% of a significant number of children in the country. And I guess that is what India's problem is, its large population. Is there a multiplier effect that can actually lead to these sustainability initiatives becoming more sustainable? Could be finance, could be policy, whatever. Your views on that?
Any growth, if it's regardless of how inclusive or how strong, if it's not as sustainable, there's really no point. It's meaningless. And in doing the sustainability, I think a lot of discussions are already had on this renewable energy. On that, clearly, this is something of the future, the same as many other disruptive technology that we need to pay attention to. We started investing in this sector in India very early, 7-8 years ago. At the time, let's say the solar panels cost a few, fortune and all that. But nowadays, before I came, I just did a calculation. The companies that are supported by IFC are financing about 22% of the renewable capacity created the last 5 years in this country. So that they are, if you strategically focus on certain areas like we do in these 3 pillars, significant result can be produced.
Right. You made a very interesting point about solar, and Andrew, let me turn that to you, and I'll come to you, Rajneesh, after that, because you two are representing, you're representing the solar sector, and EESL is doing a lot of work with electric vehicles. There is this line of thought that, sustainability initiatives also need to be viable. There is this thought that solar prices or renewable energy prices are falling too drastically. On the electric vehicle side, Rajneesh, there are these, we hear that whether this will be really palatable to the ordinary consumer given the cost. So is there a cost barrier to sustainability in the country at the moment? Andrew, if you could begin, and then Rajneesh, if you could.
See, I think falling solar prices or falling energy prices, should be seen as a good thing. If solar energy is becoming more affordable, it's good for the industry, it's good for India, I think it's good for the world. And I think the viability of the projects, the pricing that's bid into a project will, it's up to the bidder to determine whether the price is viable. It's hard to control that sort of externally. I think it's important for government bodies which are running the tenders to structure them in such a way that it doesn't, there's enough clarity given to the investors and to the developers that they can make informed decisions about what they're bidding. I think perhaps there has been an issue of overly aggressive bidding in the industry, but I would say a bigger problem than that is actually on the other side, state governments or discoms actually trying to renegotiate tenders that have already been closed. And I think that's also true in other aspects of the solar industry, like the rooftop solar space or open access solar, where we've seen just as the industry is starting to take off, we're seeing some a lot of pushback from discoms or from state governments that are trying to protect other interests.
Rajneesh, you know, the government has obviously become a big procurer of electric vehicles. When will that realistically translate to common consumers like you and me who will find the cost of the vehicle actually viable to run it on a day-to-day basis?
We did the first tender for 10,000 electric vehicles. We are start taking the requirement from the different government departments and from the public sectors. In India, there are around 500,000 vehicles which are used in the government and the public sectors. So the vehicle in the first tender itself, as I am saying that we are aggregating the demand, and when you are aggregating the demand, you can bring down the cost. Now, if I will take the example, the electric vehicles which we are procuring right now costing somewhere around 11.5 lakhs. Now, there is some subsidy which government is giving to all the consumers, to the citizen, to the government, to the public sector. Around 2.5 lakhs it is giving. So the vehicles will cost somewhere around 8.5 lakh rupees to the consumers. If I'll go for the combustion engine vehicle of the same model, that costs me somewhere around 6 lakh rupees. So the difference is only 2.5 lakh rupees. Even if this 2.5 lakh rupees, if I will consider the running cost over the period of time, the running cost is almost in the fuel, comparison of the fuel itself, it is 1/3 as compared to the fuel. Forget about the repair and maintenance, which is hardly there is any repair and maintenance in these vehicles. So in a 2 years or 3 years time, I will able to payback period will be there. And we are coming up with the next set of tender, and we are hoping the prices will come down further. It's all about the aggregation of demand and how much demand you can generate. I think it will not take more than 1.5 years or 2 years when these prices will be comparable with the combustion engines, and the fuel, which will definitely be the advantage to the consumers. So
Arunabha, your organization does a lot of research on energy, environment, and water. I think 3 things that are very intricately linked with the society, especially the way India is urbanizing. I was in Pune recently. It's a booming IT hub. Huge complexes are coming up. No water. I mean, there are water tankers coming every day, really not an ideal situation to be in. So are we urbanizing our cities in a wrong manner? And what, according to you and according to your research, would be a fix for the problem?
Your question, very simply put, are we urbanizing in the wrong way? Yes, of course, because we don't have a clear view on what a smart city should look like. We don't have a clear view of where those cities ought to be located. And we don't have a clear view of how do you make a city that already exists into something that is smarter, not just in terms of the infrastructure that you put in, but it's smarter in terms of the people who are going to use it. Ultimately, cities thrive because people want to live there, innovate, work, make money, have jobs. If we don't work backwards from that, then you're going to lose out on the innovative capital that you have, whether it's in terms of your own people, or in terms of people who want to come and live in your cities. So what's the solution? Number one, let's start collecting data on a real-time basis for all kinds of resources that we use, whether it's energy, whether it's water, whether it's our air, whether it's the soil quality, whether it's the plant life, etc. Number two, make that data visible and salient for the average citizen. Don't scare them with random numbers once in a December when the smog gets bad. Give them data in a real-time way, which is salient to understand. Number three, work on the business models that have a circular economy logic to it.
Absolutely. Joe, let me bring you in here. I mean, you are a part of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. You, by very virtue of being that, you deal with a lot of businesses and what they are doing for sustainable development. CSR is something that all companies in India have to dedicate a specific portion of their profits to. Are we using CSR in India effectively, or are some of those projects really not worth the time and money?
I would say that by and large we're using CSR ineffectively, and bringing it into this conversation, I would say, is one example, because what we are talking about here with the Sustainable Development Goals and just the issue of water, which Dr. Ghosh has just set out, we're talking about extremely urgent and large-scale systemic challenges which can't be fixed from the change in our pockets. So let's set out what we're talking about. The Sustainable Development Goals, these are the goals the world has set for a really transformed society without poverty, without hunger, with no plastic waste in the system, and with climate change managed. these global goals, to a very large extent, are actually Indian goals. India is 1/6 of the world's population, but it could be as much as half of the Sustainable Development Goals. India is where 2/3 of the people in the world without a toilet are. India is where half of the malnourished children in the world are. India is where, I'm sorry to say, but half of the people in bonded labor are. So, India is right at the center of this. India is also the fastest growing large economy in the world. It's central to the growth that the world needs. So India's success is tied up with global success and success of achieving these goals. The good news is that the transformations required are underway, and simple things like GST, demonetization, these are very important. The renewables push is happening faster than is turning into reality faster than anyone could have thought.
There's no 2-degree scenario for the world without a successful energy transition for India. We all depend on a successful transition in India. It's essential for all of our success. Now, India understands this very well and is extremely well regarded internationally in terms of climate leadership. We saw that at Davos when Prime Minister Modi made his remarks recently. What needs to happen now is that the government must build on its commitment to transform India's energy sector and really push on its targets, push on its renewable energy target, follow through on its electric vehicle mission, and create a sustainable, prosperous future for its people and a stable planet.
We need to make India the world's laboratory for innovations and technologies related to efficient power, energy, and water. Whether it is on the policy front, whether it's on the currency front, and so forth. But if we get this mantra right of policy, technology, and finance, I think we are almost certain to get a much more optimal, equitable, and resilient management of our energy and water resources.
Andrew, you mentioned regulatory challenges as well, and it seems to be a recurring theme across this panel. What could the government do to ease the regulatory landscape for companies to adopt rooftop solar in a more concerted manner?
I think there are things that the government can do to push adoption of rooftop solar, but there are also a lot of things they can do to just remove barriers that are there, right? So, for example, one very important enabler in rooftop solar adoption is net metering, which is a regulation which allows you to sell surplus power to the grid and get credited for it, right? And today, anywhere in India where net metering is possible, and fortunately it is now possible, at least on paper, ever in India almost. But you have to get approval from the distribution company for that. And actually, truthfully, there's no need to actually get approval for net metering. There's a separate requirement for getting.
It's quite prevalent abroad, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
It's quite prevalent in some of the
Western
countries.
It is. But you see, there's already an electrical safety approval which you have to get for any rooftop solar plant, right? So that covers the safety aspect of it. Right. Now, when you introduce an approval that you have to get for net metering, it means that you have to go to the DISCOM and apply. Right. And then basically the DISCOM is put in a position of having to create an application process, a screening process, technical requirements, all of which are actually more or less unnecessary for a rooftop solar plant. So if you just actually, instead of trying to streamline the net metering regulations, if you were to actually just remove the requirement of getting approval in the first place, if you basically create a system of having a deemed approval, right? So deemed approvals are there, for example, when it comes to land use conversion for a solar project.
Sure.
So if you were to say that if you set up a rooftop solar plant and you have the right safety approval in place, you can immediately start availing a net metering policy without waiting for the DISCOM to process your application. That would be a huge benefit to especially smaller rooftop installations, which today are the ones which are not taking off.
Joke, very quickly, which are some of the industrial sectors or business sectors in the country that are more forward-thinking and forward-looking when it comes to sustainable practices, and which are some of the laggards, according to you?
Okay, so I think that business in India and sustainability is a bit like India and climate action in the world. I think that there's an awful lot of good practice, and for example, India, I think, is seen as a leader internationally, but it's not commensurate with the scale of the challenge. So what we see in India very often, whether it's an Indian headquartered company or the subsidiary of a global company, is world-class engineering, world-class energy efficiency, world-class performance on water management. And this is because water is scarce, energy is expensive, and India has a fantastic engineering culture. So, you know, for example, the Indian cement sector is the most energy efficient in the world. Fantastic. I think that as you go very quickly, Indian industry gets into smaller companies, and there is where the gap is.
Right.
But the progress to be made is in the hard-to-abate sectors. So I mentioned cement. There's an awful lot of cement production that is still extremely CO2 emitting. It's very hard to abate that. Steel is another sector. And we've talked a lot about mobility. Until we make the shift to electric vehicles, that's going to be very, very challenging.
Right. Arnab, my last point is there a problem with the mindset among us in terms of the way we approach sustainability and civic sense? And do we need to do more from an education point of view to teach our children in schools and colleges to be more, think more sustainably, act more sustainably, and just, generally be more responsible citizens? Do we do enough of that?
The short answer is clearly we don't. India has 750,000 primary schools. Every second primary school does not even have a wire coming into its premises. Now, you actually started off this panel talking about sustainable development goals. The single biggest leverage is female education. It will impact all other sustainable development goals. Now, to do that, you've got to provide functioning water services and functioning energy services in functioning schools.
Right.
For women, for girls. And that will have a spillover impact across all the 17 goals that you're talking about. We have longitudinal data for more than 4 decades that demonstrates this. So it's not about what you teach in one period for civics. It is about understanding that the citizen is now both the consumer and the producer of a different form of a natural resource-based economy.
Right. Quickly, do you want to add something?
I just want to say, of course our children deserve investment, and we should give them that investment. But what we can really do for them is act today. You asked who, and not put this problem on them to solve tomorrow. We need to fix it today. Anyone in this room who is from a business, or anyone who speaks to a business, one way to find out if you're a leader or a laggard, do you know whether every employee who works for you in every location has safe access to clean water, to hygiene, and to a toilet? Because that is, as we run companies, that is our responsibility. And if we know the answer to that question, then we are leaders, and if we don't, then in this dimension we are laggards. And I would encourage all of you to assess that. And there are companies that do know that answer, and I know that there are many that don't. So have a look at WASH in the workplace as a way to make sure that you're living up to your responsibilities.
Sure. I think it's time for companies to do an in-house survey now after what Joe has said. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being on this panel. Before we kind of sign off, there is one thing that I would fail my duties if I didn't mention, that this backdrop that you see behind us has been made of jute and coconut coir. And the table cards in front of you actually contain seeds for what we call tulsi in Hindi. And if you plant them and water them, then they will grow into plants. So we've done our bit for the environment today. We hope you will as well.
We have a very young organization, dynamic organization. We have an average age of a staff around 35 years, right from top to the youngest one. And there is a lot of enthusiasm in the employees. They are taking up new things. They are coming up with the new ideas. And that idea is being brought to the management, and we are exploring, we are working on these ideas. And you can see that a lot of new things is being introduced by the ESL into the public domain. The new programs are there. It's a street light program, national street light program, you can say, the LED bulb program. Now we are moving towards the e-mobility, smart meter, solar. So many things are happening, and all this because of the employees' participation, their activeness. We are able to deliver the things in a very short possible manners.
There are many things that can be done. The first thing to begin with is this subscribing to the green bonds. There are so many in the market now. In India, probably 400 million worth out there already. And secondly, working with like-minded partners and be selective. And thirdly, ask right questions before you make an investment.
So I think for domestic power consumers to start really adopting rooftop solar power, two things really need to be in place. One is that the process needs to be very straightforward. So if you're expecting an individual consumer to go to the DISCOM and to sit in front of them and try to get a net metering application processed, and if it's very tedious, realistically, they won't do it. So the process for doing that needs to be very straightforward and easy for the consumer. And really the second condition is that the numbers need to stack up. Unless the power pricing itself is going to change, there needs to be some sort of incentive mechanism such as a feed-in tariff where residential consumers are paid a price which makes it worthwhile for them to actually invest in a solar power plant.